Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. And for those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. And you can check out our training and education menu on the websites for more events coming up online. So welcome today to the webinar, An Introduction to Microsoft SharePoint with Conan and Alex from the IT team. And just before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please just type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I should be able to assist. Likewise, if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the questions box and our panelists will be able to answer them in the Q&A session that will be coming up at the end of today's webinar. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, sometimes this can affect the quality of the audio and the video, so please just close any programs that you're not using. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording and the slides towards the end of today. And just before we start, I'd like to remind everybody that there'll be a short survey popping up at the end of today's webinar, and we'd really appreciate any feedback. That's all from me. I will pass over to Colin to get things started.
Thank you very much, Jane. As Jane introduced us very well, my name is Conan. I'm the General Manager of the IT team, and I'm joined by Alex.
Hello. Yep, I'm an engineer from the IT team.
Yep. Probably understating himself a little bit. He's a kind of resident SharePoint and 365 expert. Hopefully none of the other engineers listen to this, but he is, and he's best suited to take us through today. Even though it is an introduction to SharePoint, there's a little bit of complexity to us explaining it, and it does evolve. And each time we do a webinar like this, what we showcase does change a little bit. So if you've attended some of our webinars before, you know, there may be some content. There's very certainly going to be some content that you've seen before, but there's likely to be some new stuff too, hopefully. So, and with that, we're going to kick off with some polls. This is to allow us to get a bit of an idea of our audience. We do kind of change things on the fly, and it'll allow us to, you know, focus in certain areas where we otherwise may not, depending on what we see. So Jane, if you could throw up the first poll, please. So the poll is, I have to look on the little screen. Are you currently using any elements of Office 365? I should be calling that Microsoft 365, to be honest. So yeah, that's lazy of me. But it's commonly known as Office 365 still a little bit. So let's assume it's Microsoft 365. Okay, so wow, there's a large portion of people that are using, in fact, near the majority, at least the largest portion are using Office 365 for documents, emails, and other functions, which I would take from that you are likely using SharePoint or perhaps OneDrive. I think there's a further poll question on that. And then the next group is probably the one I expected, which is the using Office through Office 365, which is very common. And we sort of see that, no offense, as not really using Office 365. Microsoft have sort of inconveniently or conveniently slotted Office software into the Office 365 portal, and so a lot of people think they are using it when technically they are, but in fact they're not really scratching the surface. So anyway, we'll continue on with that. Next poll, please, Jane. Also, we don't get to see who answers what, so. What service are you currently using for email? Thank you. So we have the most common one is we're using Exchange Online. That's brilliant. Jane, before you put the next one up, what is the title of that webinar or of that poll?
The next poll, hold on a second. Where do you store documents files?
Perfect. Excellent. Because that poll you just put up was from an old poll.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. I just wonder where it came from. Perfect. This is it. Yeah. Where do you store documents and files? This is a bit more relevant to this topic, but the email one is interesting anyway, and it looked like most people were using it the right way. So where are you currently storing your documents and files? Excited to see what the next poll is going to be. So we have a file server, which is great. That is the largest portion, which I think is very relevant and probably an answer that we hope to see a fair amount of, because it's a pretty, this is a big potential change and can provide big potential benefits. No one's got, I'm not sure, which is great. And there's a few OneDrive SharePoint as well. And there's at least one or two more polls, isn't there? Yes, one more. The intranet, two more, sorry. Do you have an intranet? There we go. No, very good. Okay, the vast majority is no, and a few have even said what's intranet. Fair call. We'll try and answer that today. And the last poll, Jane. What are you hoping to get out today? Now, it could be more, it says please select one. Please select, I guess, the one that is the most significant for you, or closest to what you're hoping to get out of. Okay, learn more about SharePoint. Well, that is good. And there's a few reasons in there and a bit about best practice, which is great. Those two lines are probably the most applicable to the content we've got today. Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Jane. Yeah, it was only that one rogue poll. Maybe it was from an old webinar, but that's okay. It was kind of applicable anyway. This is live TV, so these things happen. Anyway, we'll jump along to the next slide. Thanks for that. As we're doing these polls, a few sort of people come in and join, so it's good to, but we still get the bulk of the audience. Okay, so who is this webinar for? So those that are new to SharePoint and M365, not just them, but they should get something out of this. Those that are using 365 but have not started with SharePoint, wishing to or needing to understand how to get started. Now, this is a common thing. You've got, you've got SharePoint. You may have even clicked on the link in your 365, but you're not really sure how to get started. And it is probably the most difficult system to kind of get started with, I would say, beyond something like Teams or Exchange, because Exchange you kind of get your IT provider or you set it up and either it's working or it isn't. Whereas SharePoint, it can be deployed and still fail to take hold in your organization. And that's something, and there's many ways to deploy it right. There's many ways to deploy it, and some are more right than others, I should say. So the other element of who this webinar is for is those who want to understand how it works, not just why to use it. So we're going to go over why, but not just, but also how. Next one, what are we going to cover? What is it? Why you should want it? And how OneDrive and Teams fit in. And then there's going to be quite a lot of information about SharePoint, and demonstrations are going to be peppered throughout. So Alex is, instead of having one big presentation session, we're going to jump in and out of the demonstrations as we go through, I guess, the makeup of it. It's not the most linear of webinars or of tools, so you're going to have to try and we hope that you'll be able to grasp the concepts as we go through. This will be more clear than others. It's not like a file server where you have some folders and you put files in. There's a bit more to it than that, but if you get a good idea of it, there's big benefits here for your organizations. So very quickly on the IT team, so formed in 2011, I should say it turns out to Microsoft 365 since inception. We do managed support for customers, a very wide range of IT services. We also have, VoIP, security, there's a lot. Not-for-profits or NGOs are a large portion of our customer base, the largest, and we provide support or services to both NZ and Australian organisations. So SharePoint, this is the topic of the day. When we're talking about SharePoint, we're talking about SharePoint Online, even though SharePoint has existed for some time. It's one of Microsoft's technologies since, what do you reckon, Alex, 2003, 2005?
Long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. And so you may have actually heard of or used SharePoint in the 2000s and the noughts. I can tell you, while some of the look and the principles of it are similar to today, it is a very different product today. Let's crack in. So what is it? SharePoint Online is stored in 365, managed by Microsoft. So it's a system, it's not a server, it's not an application you run on your server in the office. It is stored in Microsoft, managed by them. Doesn't mean you can get away with doing some management. There's a bit of administration to it, as we'd call it, but it's supported. You don't have to control whether it's, or your IT person doesn't have to control whether it's up or down, just like the rest of 365. It's a document management and collaboration tool. We'll talk about the collaboration and showcase it soon, but it's more of a collaboration tool than a file server, and it's more of a document management tool than a file server again. Those are two separate things. It can be used as an intranet and potentially also a file server. Equivalent, a file storage, an alternative to a file server. So many of the people in this group either have had or are using a file server to store their files or some sort of desktop in their office. This can be used to store pretty much all of those files, but it can also be an intranet, and those two can be intertwined. It is part of pretty much every 365 plan. If you're approved with TechSoup, you will have a plan that can have it. E1 is a common one, Business Basic or Business Standard also, and same with Business Premium. Pretty much every plan except for the individual split plans like Exchange Online 1 and that kind of thing will have SharePoint Online. It's primarily for internal use as an organization. So you can share documents and folders, I guess you'd call them, libraries, to outside people, and that can be on a short-term or a long-term basis. But you should think of it as it's not your website, it's not for a public thing with customers or anything. It's for your organization internally. And if you think about an intranet, intranet is kind of the internal version of a website in a way. It's a visual, yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it, and you could touch on that, Alex. It's an intranet, it's not on the internet, well, it is, but it's traditionally something that was internal only, and it's kind of an internal facing organizational website. Is that right, Alex?
Yeah, so it's a website used for internal purposes, and I'll demonstrate what SharePoint looks like so you can see some of the uses. So yeah, that's what an intranet is, if anyone was wondering.
Good one. And it's for organizational usage rather than individual storage. And we'll talk a little bit about OneDrive and Dropbox. So OneDrive is kind of your individual usage. You can share it with other people, but it's individual. Whereas SharePoint is organization-wide, groups, teams, that kind of thing, but organization-wide. All right, now quickly, why use SharePoint Online? Why should you consider it? And I should say that there will be a lot of people, and there will be a lot of attendees, I would say, particularly the ones that selected SharePoint or they store in documents. They might be storing some documents, or having a portion of their organization. I guess when we look at this, we're talking about why should you use this as your primary or sole document storage system and intranet. So critical one is infrastructure costs. When we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about equipment, servers, any kind of fees that you may pay for services that would be doing an intranet, like say Dropbox, for example, or a storage facility. But critically, servers, if you're running a file server, there is costs associated with that. Whether you've got an old server that's running, there'll be backup storage, there's backup costs that are associated with that. But this is something that does cost a lot of money in the long run. And then even more so, probably costing even more, is the support costs. People from companies like the IT team or your internal resources potentially, maintaining a file server. Obviously, there's multiple functions usually on a file server, but maintaining that file server, backing it up, dealing with support queries does add up to quite a lot. Most of our customers that are able to use M365 to its fullest are not paying. We do significantly less work for them, particularly around sort of backroom support, because we don't need to maintain 365 or support it. Well, we need to support it, we don't need to maintain it. You can administrate internally, and that's a key thing. Often with file servers, you have to get your IT person to provide some administration. The idea behind SharePoint Online is the organization can self-administer because it's more, once you understand it, it's a bit more simple. Or the users are self-administering in a way. Continuous improvement, you get the benefit of Microsoft continuously evolving and upgrading the tool, as well as third parties at times. Collaboration, the ability to collaborate goes well beyond what is possible on a traditional file server. And mobility, you can use it anywhere. You don't have to have a VPN. You don't have to be close to the server. You don't have to worry about that kind of thing. You can use it anywhere. I know some people with internet issues will say that that's a concern, but that in the long run, as those internet, even in Australia, some of the poorer areas with internet, they will get resolved. And so thinking about this is never going to be a bad thing. All right. Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint. I'll just touch on this, and Alex will go into more detail. The reason why we're talking about these is because they do cross over quite heavily. So firstly, OneDrive, as we said before, for files, for your personal individual files. Now, we don't mean personal like your photos necessarily, or can have that, but it's more your individual files that you're working on that you're not really ready or wanting to share with your colleagues. For me, it's like my messy briefcase in a way, my OneDrive. It's got a lot of things that are in there, generally unfiled, generally messy, but it's there, it's backed up, and I can access it from multiple devices. In addition, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. OneDrive can control the sync from SharePoint. So you can sync SharePoint drives or libraries down to your Explorer, your desktop laptop, and OneDrive is the tool that pulls that down. Now Teams sort of doesn't really sit in the middle, it's more of a triangle, but you could say it sits in the middle, but it has quite a bit of integration with SharePoint, particularly in how groups are concerned, and Alex will talk about that soon. But you can also have files and associate them with meetings that will sit in SharePoint behind the scenes. Teams is obviously a very good tool with the calling and the chat and the group Teams-based channel communication. And if you haven't looked at that, we'd definitely recommend you check out one of our other webinars. And then SharePoint is both, as we've said, shared docs and intranet. Alex, take it away.
Perfect. Yeah, so obviously today we're mainly focusing on SharePoint. So SharePoint's on the right there, and as the name gives away, that's for the internal files you're sharing with each other, and also the intranet. And as Conan said, yeah, it is where the files are stored if you're using Microsoft Teams and the Teams functions. They all live on SharePoint. Even if you're using Teams and you're not using SharePoint, you've actually got SharePoint, even though you don't realize it. And you've also got OneDrive, even though you may not realize it. So we jump to the next slide.
Oh.
Yeah, so just to recover over OneDrive again, so this is for the individual's user data. You can set it to back up each individual's workstation or computer, laptop. So any files that they store on their desktop, documents, that kind of thing, get saved to the cloud automatically. You can do some basic sharing with it, so maybe person to person, but it's not designed to be sharing files within the whole entire organization. If you're using OneDrive Business or OneDrive for this purpose, trying to share it with everyone in your organization, you shouldn't. You should use SharePoint, and hopefully they'll come clear in a minute.
And there are actually a lot of organizations that do that. We keep coming across them, and it's understandable. They've got a single account set up on multiple machines, and technically that synchronizes across the organization. They can have that for years, but there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to do that, notwithstanding the one that's not really supported. It's not the right way to do it. You're not going to know who's done what, and there's really little control over security or permissions. Go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah, the biggest problem with someone doing that is if someone leaves an organization and their account's shut down, where do the files go? If it's on SharePoint, it's already separate from that user. It's not attached to that user. It's in its own organization controlled account, as it were. So yeah, that's OneDrive. So SharePoint, so the base setup, and this is kind of the key, and this is, if there's one takeaway you can think about how SharePoint is structured, it looks like this. So it's a web page. So you access it through a web browser, so Google Chrome, Edge, whatever you are using, and it's made up of 3 different types of web pages. So you got team sites, communication sites, and hub sites. Team sites are the one that you use most often. So if you can imagine your organization and split it up into a whole bunch of different teams that do different things. You may have administration-based teams for running your organization. You may have the services or the programs that you run. They might have individual teams, and you may have teams for, like, fun things, non-work related. Anything that, any group of people that are working on a project, a committee, or a service that you offer, that they should be in a team. And that's one core of SharePoint, is the team site. Next up is communication sites. So this is a web page on an intranet which is trying to get a message across to your employees. So your employees can go to this website and they can learn something, they can read something, they can get information on something. So commonly I see this for like staff policies or how-to guides, procedures, or a place to find forms, or maybe news. Anything that you want to get across internally should be used on a communication site. And a hub site is all about connections. So a hub site has, underneath it, it's got links to the various teams and communication sites. So if you think about it, if we move to the next slide, please. Oops. Here's a little animated diagram. So in the middle, in the yellow, we've got the hub sites. So that's a web page that the user would normally go to first. And then there's links around the outside on the diagram, the lines, to the various other types of sites, being communication team sites. So if we look at the top one in sales, and this will be similar to the example that I give shortly, we've got the sales hub in the beginning, in the middle, and then around the outside, we've got team sites for the various teams within sales, and also communication sites. In this case, it's quarterly reports where people can go and read information. So those are the 2 types of sites. Get the next one, I think. So just to reiterate, team sites are for collaboration. And if you're sharing documents and things, the permissions are set from this level. Communication sites are all about communications. That's about getting the message out to people. And hub sites are all about connections. There's also a link here that we'll see if we can flick out.
Yeah, I'll paste it later. Yep.
Yep, which takes you straight to the Microsoft documentation that explains that. Now, one key thing I want to talk about is in the teams, you get to manage your own permissions. So each team has got an owner. They're like the person that's in charge of the team, and it's that owner's responsibility to add or remove members. Members can see all the material that's inside the team. They can chat, they can look at the content, and they can edit the content, but they can't add or remove members. The owners can. So if you could imagine that in the admin team, you've got someone who's in charge, maybe an administration manager. It's their responsibility to add new team members as they come on board, or remove them when they leave that role. Or maybe you've got a a project team. You've got a project going on. Whoever's the project lead will most likely be the owner, and they can add who's involved in that team and who isn't. I'll demonstrate that. So I think, does that take us to the demo now? Yeah. So
Yes.
It does. So if you pass me over
To you.
I'll just share my screen. Hopefully, is that sharing coming through?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So if we just have a look here, this here is a web page. As you can see, I'm using Edge. And this is what's called a hub page. So this is a demo put out by Microsoft, by the way. So this is like the page that has all the links to the various teams along the top. In this case, we've got 3 sites to look at. I'll look at them shortly, but you can put anything you want on a hub page. As it is, as I said, it's a web page. It's internally facing. So in this particular case, I've got some articles that you can read related to sales, obviously, because we're in the sales hub. And all of this is very easily editable by you inside an organization. There's an edit pencil up the top right here, and that lets you edit the content on the page. So they've also got some more news articles linking around the place. They've got some links to various other teams. You can do calendars, look at some popular documents and have some quick links to that kind of thing. A link to people, key people within the organization, videos. So it's basically a web page that you can edit and put the content that your team needs to look at. But the first function, obviously, of a hub page that we're looking at, the hub site, which is global sales, is to link to other sites. So along the top here, we've got a few sites I've created. So first of all, we'll look at a communication site. So this is one where you're trying to get a message across to the people. And here's an example. So this is obviously the retail operations showing off what's going on for the team. And as you can see, you know, they've got videos and links to various things. Give you another example of a communication site would be maybe one that they've called the landing, which is one for internal employees to get information so they can find out what careers and benefits, for instance, in this demo, they can get, or what the company's policies are, or how they can get help from IT, as well as just looking at key information that they may find useful. That's what a communication site is. It's graphical. It's trying to get people to look at it. You're trying to spread a message. Moving on to the one that you'll probably use most, which is team sites. So in this case, we've got 2 teams. We've got the sales and marketing team, and we've got the retail team. If I click onto a retail team, it will look something like this. Again, this is fully editable, but this is what each team looks like when you set it up for the first time. And on the left, we've got a bunch of links. If I click on documents, that is where the documents for this particular team will live. And it's like you're used to, it's folders and links to documents, as well as a bunch of other things that go to different places, which I won't talk about at the moment. We go to home. And you know how I mentioned that your organization can manage the permissions? To do that, you'd click inside your team. So in this case, we're looking at the retail team. Click over here in the members. And you'll see that you can at a glance quickly see who is a member of the team and has access to all the files and conversations and things underneath. This particular case, I'm Megan and I am an owner, which means I get this big button here that says add members, and that allows me to add new members to the team very quickly. Everyone that's a member will not have that button. They'll be able to see who's in the team, but they won't be able to add new people. Perfect. So that is a very quick overview of what a SharePoint looks like in the structure. And I'll jump back in shortly, but if we show the next slide, give me a second.
I believe we need you to turn it back over, Alex, if you don't mind.
Yeah. There you go.
Yep. 1 second, folks.
Always fun changing presenter.
Yes, yes.
All right. So many of you are using a file server and you're wanting to know, well, it's all well and good having an intranet, yeah, I can see some use to that, but I really just want to get the files off that old box in the corner and get it on the online onto the cloud where we can access it from wherever we want. But I'm slightly concerned, how do I get to my files once they're up there? It's obviously not going to be as easy as it is now. So I thought I'd just go over 4 different ways that you can get to and edit and manage your files. And I'll list them through them and then I'll demo again. So the first way is obviously getting them online, which is the one I just showed. You can get them through your web browser, see your files, click on them, open them, etc. Second one is if you're using Microsoft Teams, and I'll give you a very quick rundown on how you can actually use the Microsoft Teams client to access your files. The third way is directly through the Microsoft 365 apps. So this is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So if you're running those programs on your computer, you can actually just open up Word and then immediately open or save to SharePoint without having to go to a web page, without having to sync something down. And lastly, is syncing to your PC. There's a button that you can press that basically makes a copy of what's in SharePoint Online and syncs it down to that particular user's computer.
Or the full sort of library as well.
Yeah, the full library. Yeah. Now we've got written there, not everything pane. We have seen some organizations think, okay, I can basically use SharePoint like I would a file server. I'm going to move all my files there, and then on all my staff's computer, I'm going to sync everything down. Well, the typical computer, even the best available these days, can't really hold or cope with syncing every single document that an organization has. So typically you'd only sync what you really need to use. So if you're using it offline or you need quick access or you need to be able to get to it through Windows Explorer, those would be the only reasons you'd really want to sync. But I'll demonstrate all 4 of them now. Look it over to me.
Yep.
Great.
And it's not uncommon, should say, that an organization will use all 4 of them, either based on particular users or just, how you feel. I know I use all of them at different times.
Yeah, none of them are wrong. They've all got their uses.
Yeah, that's right.
You can see the screen again. All coming through?
Can, yep.
Perfect. So I'm just going to click on retail operations, and the first way, sales and marketing. We'll just open up a random document. So click on documents. And let's just pick a Word document, this one, for instance. So if you just click on it, and the default setting is just open up in Word Online, which looks something like this. It's basically a stripped down version of the Office programs, and it runs through your web browser. So it doesn't have all the features, but if you just want to quickly look at it or make a quick edit, yeah, it's fine to do that. But that's not the only way that you can actually use the web to access your files. You can actually set each team different settings on how you want to open documents. All right, so I'm just going to jump across to the retail site because I've actually changed the settings on that one. Retail team. And I'm just going to pick a random document, and in this one, you'll see it opens up Word. It's opening down the bottom here, and it's loaded up Word. And it's loaded up the full, like you'd normally expect, version of Microsoft Word that's running on the desktop. I haven't had to sync it. I haven't had to do anything like that. It's just opened it up like it would if you're on a file server. So that's 2 ways that you can use the web pages to get to the files. The second one, it would be using Microsoft Teams. And if you're working remotely, sorry?
Third one.
No, second one.
Okay.
Sorry. Teams. Yeah, that's 2 ways of getting it from the web. Yeah. Second one would be using Microsoft Teams. So you may or may not be using Microsoft Teams, and I won't go into too much detail here because it is kind of a different topic. But you'll see retail, sales and marketing and retail teams, sales and marketing retail. These team sites also make or can make a team within Microsoft Teams. And if I click into retail and then click on the files tab, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different files here. If I go into retail and I'm in the general folder, go to the general and try to get them side by side, you'll see that the files are the same. That's because every channel in Teams actually makes a folder within SharePoint. And that's what I meant earlier, that if you're using Teams and you've got Teams set up like this, you've actually got SharePoint running in the background, even though you didn't realize it. No one may have clicked on it, but it's there. And there's actually a link through Microsoft Teams. If I click that, it will just open up this in the web. But of course, if you want to make a quick edit within Microsoft Teams, you just click on it, and it actually lets you edit the document straight within Microsoft Teams. Again, good for quick edits. Probably not good for like doing massive amounts of work, word processing. And that also does mean that if you drop a file into a conversation in Teams, so for instance, like Johanna has here, I put these two documents in the general, the sales brochure, they actually will show up saved in SharePoint in the right spot. Here they are here. So that's a second way. The third way is if you're running Word or PowerPoint or Excel, you can actually save things directly through Word to SharePoint. So I'll just open up a blank Word document here.
It's actually pretty handy, particularly for recent docs. I use a lot for recent.
Yep. So here we go. A test. This is just a new Word. It's running on the computer, but it's not saved anywhere yet. Go File, Save. It's going to ask me where. Now you've probably seen this before, and you'd be clicking. If you've got a file server, you'd be clicking Browse, and you'd be finding your file server, you know, P drive, network, whatever. But with the modern Word, you actually get an option here, Sites, and then we can see, okay, here's the retail team that I'm a member of. I want to drop that just in the top level. You click Save, and I've saved directly to SharePoint. I've saved straight up to the internet, so I didn't actually need to save it on my computer. And when you do that, of course, it pops up saying it's automatically saving. Because I'm saving directly up to the internet, there's no need to hit the save button anymore. It's just there. So that's the third way. And the fourth way, which is slightly more tricky to get your head around, is syncing. So I need to be able to get these files on my desktop through the normal file explorer here. How do I do that? You'll see here there's a sync button, and that tells SharePoint to do exactly that. So I've already synced one. You see here it says Contoso, that's the fictional company that we're talking about, with the little building. That's how you know it's SharePoint. You can see I've already synced the retail folder here from the retail team. Let's sync sales and marketing team. So I want to get the sales and marketing files on my local computer. So go to sales and marketing, click on documents, and click sync. And any second, there, sales and marketing appears. And I click on it, I've instantly got all those documents pulled through. Now, it actually hasn't downloaded a copy of each of these documents onto my computer. It's only really got a thumbnail, like a shortcut to the document. You can tell that because it's got the little cloud icon, which means it's online. But that doesn't really matter because all I've got to do is open one of them. It will instantly download it and I'll open up the document like so. Again, it's smart enough to know that it's actually saving to the cloud as well as on your device. So autosave is on. Now, I was just going to do another quick demo with Conan, just to show you like what one of the advantages of editing a document that's saved on SharePoint is. And that's the ability to co-edit. So this is working on documents at the same time. So you'll see up here, we've got Conan, he's signed up there. And
we usually have CD, like Conan Day, but it has GC because we're using a trial, a test environment. Yeah, so it just says guest. And you can invite guests, you can invite people from outside your organization to documents as well.
Yeah. So I can actually jump to where Conan is, and I can see he's right at the top of the document. He's going to write something there.
No, I've actually moved it down because that was a bit big, the text. So just go down a bit further.
Yeah, I got you. And you can see his red cursor there.
Actually, it's not working for me either.
As he writes. Sorry, I'm clicking on the wrong spot. I'll be able to see him editing as he writes. So here you go, test from Conan, and I'm not doing it, hands are off. And I can also do the same thing. So while he's writing that, I can type something and it goes straight through. So that, yeah, that's just co-editing. So that's just one cool feature. What's the time? A little bit more time. So that, yeah, that's the 4 main ways of accessing your files. Now, there's a few other advantages over a file server that you get as well. One would be version history. So for instance, I can click here on any document and I can see when they were last edited. So I can see that 2 people have edited this particular file and I can click into it. I can view the latest edit, or I can view what Alex did first. And then if I'm not happy with what Megan's done, I can just restore back the prior version. This is also very useful and failed. That's because this is a demo site. Normally it wouldn't. Yeah, so you'll be able to see who's edited what when, I think. Yeah, and quickly revert back any changes that have been made. So yeah, that's just another feature that you can do on SharePoint. So those are the 4 main ways of editing files. So I'll give you back control now, Conan.
Cool. That's good. Share screen. Get fast for this. Can you see? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's clear. As we said, some of those you might have gone, ugh, I don't really see how I've never used Teams before, so why would I want to interact with it in there? And really, you'd only want to interact with it in Teams if you're using Teams extensively, and I can tell you that's something you might want to consider because it does have massive benefits. But ultimately, the most common is to kind of pick between using the web predominantly or going with the PC. Now, our recommendation is to use the web because it is far more powerful, more feature rich, and once users get accustomed to it, they do kind of, you know, get a little bit less frustrated with the fact that they've been using a file server for the last 25 years, you know. So it is something that does take a bit of time, but you can have sort of multiple sort of people depending on, well, multiple methods for multiple people depending on their literacy, comfort, and maybe training situation. Anyway, as you were, Alex.
Yep, no, that's all good. So you might have seen me talking earlier about the various members within each of the SharePoint team sites, and that the fact that you can manage them yourself. Every team that you create actually gets more than just a SharePoint page. So it gets Microsoft Teams. We've got on the bottom left there. Everyone gets their own email address. So every team gets their own unique email address. It gets a shared calendar that they can work from. It gets a SharePoint site. If you're using OneNote, it gets its own OneNote notebook. And it gets its own stream, and I'll stop there because there's more that you get. Stream is like your internal YouTube, so it gets its own YouTube channel effectively. We can save meetings and internal training videos, that kind of thing. So every team gets all of that, and it's literally a one-click to set up a team, and you get all that automatically. This is just an intro, so unfortunately I can't go into how to create teams and that kind of thing, but it's very powerful. And the permissions are also set there. So each group with all those various features is managed the same way. So you've got an owner and you've got people underneath it. So if you remove someone from the retail team, you're also removing them from the retail team email, the retail team calendar, the retail team notebook. Yep, so that's just a touch on Microsoft 365 groups. So you might be thinking, this is cool, there's lots of features, but where do we get started? Like, this would be impossible to do. How do we do training? Like, you know, there's so many moving parts in an organization, we could never do it. What we find, and this isn't a Microsoft published way or anything, but what we find internally is the best way to help organizations to get started thinking along the tracks of wanting SharePoint is, first of all, not thinking of taking a big bang approach. So not trying to say, okay, on Thursday the 16th, everything's going to be moved across to SharePoint. It's much better to take a slow and steady approach, maybe make a few teams and then practice and play with it, do training up front, and then get the teams to move their own documents over a period of time. Put deadlines on, keep nudging them. If they've got questions, help them. But at the end of it, you'll have a much better result than just dropping it on them. On Thursday, everyone's using SharePoint, better get used to it. So after that, the first thing to do is agree on the structure, which can be difficult to do. But the good thing is, since you're not going to do it all at once, you don't need to get the structure perfect. Now you can get like 80% there, and then make teams on the fly as it evolves. So to do that, you need to decide which teams do you want and who is in each team. And this is really as simple as getting a bit of paper, starting to draw some circles on it, saying, okay, got a finance team, and it's going to be made up of these people, or we've got a community support team, and it's going to have these people in it. Many companies or organizations at that point, they start making this SharePoint. The next thing you can do is decide which communication sites, if any, you want. So this is, okay, we've got to have a policy site. We've got to have a way that our companies can see, our employees can see our policies. Or we want to have a news site, so that way we can get news out to people. And lastly, which hubs? So at this point, you'll have a big piece of paper with lots of circles all over it with names. You need to group them into logical areas, into hubs. So some common hubs we'll see for non-profit kind of organizations would be like an internal hub for doing your admin work, so things that make your organization run. You'll have a services hub, or something with all the teams of the various services that you provide the community. And then you'll probably have like a people hub, something for the staff to get the information that they need. There's others, you could go on and on and on. You could have governance hubs, you could have management hubs, you could have hubs for a very big part of your business. But generally, if you're a smaller organization, you want to keep it somewhat small. And lastly, it's not so important, but you can also think, which channels do we want under each team, or which top level folders do we want under every team? I've said it's not as important because that kind of thing should kind of evolve as you start using it, as people start creating it. Perfect, so that's kind of a rough guideline. It's obviously this isn't very detailed, but that's the rough idea of how you would go about doing something like a SharePoint migration. Get the next slide. So it's just some adoption tips that probably will help. Firstly, create good reasons to go there. I know like making graphics and making it look pretty is somewhat difficult to do, so not immediately obvious what content you want to put on it, but you need to create a reason to go there. Otherwise, people are going to go there not willingly, so make it look good. Consider champions in your team. So if you're a larger organization and there's more than 5 of you, maybe pick out, I don't know, 3 or 4 to get really upskilled in SharePoint, and then they can champion that down to your team. So be like, hey guys, we should be doing it this way. And that would be the person that the smaller group of people within your organization goes to. Visual appeal, as I mentioned before, and some training may be beneficial just for the everyday tasks for all your staff on like how to move copy documents, how to save things, how to open things, how to edit things.
Cool.
All right, so governance and processes. This is a very big topic, and governance, unfortunately, is not something that we can really talk about here, but just to say at the beginning that if you're going to be using SharePoint and you need to get into governance and you need to be, you've got requirements, legal requirements that you need to fulfill.
Which many of the attendees here will actually have. So
yeah, you may not realize it, but you probably will, especially if you're in Australia, about privacy and that kind of thing to do with customers' data or the people you're helping's data, personal data. You need to start thinking about some of these things. So teams in SharePoint, don't make it too rigid. Let people change things as they see fit. So make new teams, make new folders. If you make it too rigid, people will try doing it another way. Put some restrictions in place and make sure it's documented. So maybe some teams you don't let people share. And that is something that you can set in the back end to stop people sharing. And consider which ones need to be like more locked down. So a general site probably doesn't need to be that locked down because it's just general material going in it. An HR team, however, where it's got all your employees' contracts and that kind of thing, does need to be locked down. You don't want everyone looking at that.
No, with general,
you know, compliance as well, Colin?
Yeah, just 1 second. So with general, the only thing is often you should have some soft parameters for your team, like what should and shouldn't you put in there, because it can be often organization will start with general and then it becomes a bit of a dumping ground, particularly in teams. But yeah, anyway, do you want to showcase? Do you want to share it back to you, Alex?
Yeah, well, just on compliance. Yeah, Microsoft and Office 365 can offer lots of things to do with compliance, i.e. working out what your data is. So things like sensitivity labels and making sure that if someone tries to share a document outside the organization that's maybe got someone's personal details in it, that it gets picked up and it gets stopped from happening. And then being able to say to external auditors, yes, we're compliant, this is what we've got in place, this is who's monitoring it, and this is the standard that we're reaching. Again, that's a massive conversation. It's bigger than SharePoint in some ways, but SharePoint fully supports the various compliance tools that Microsoft offers.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and if you're getting down the road with this, or you wish to accelerate down this road, we did a webinar 2 or 3 weeks ago that was around M365 security, and it's probably worth having a look at if you didn't attend it. Now, it can seem like it's a bit of a and then you know you have to take something on and then you can do it. What I'd suggest is that your ability to control your data is significantly limited on a traditional file server compared with what is possible with SharePoint and the 365 platform. There might be someone here that want to have a bit of an argument with me, and that's fine, because but it's you know, what we understand, you know, in our journey and what we believe is moving to SharePoint kind of enables you to go significantly further than you would otherwise. For example, as Alex mentioned, retention labels, being able to flag in Outlook if there is content in an email that or in a document that is attached that you as an organization do not want to leave the organization, or you wish to have someone notified. The Australian equivalent of the NHI numbers, the national health numbers, or whatever it is, same with the social services numbers. Usually these are associated with personal information. You know, if you really wanted, you know, a long-term goal could be to have that stuff can't exit unless it's going to certain locations or by certain people. Now this sounds really heavy and probably inaccessible, and it is a little bit, you know, but it's a journey. You know, you got to start somewhere. And so I think if you want, if this is a hot topic for you, your board, your leadership team, then you know this is a good area to go down to enable you to take it further. Moving to SharePoint is not going to give you the stuff out of the box. It's going to have a baseline level of, I guess, security and sophistication and compliance, but it's not going to default. Just because you get the right plan doesn't mean you've got all the right features. It does require a fair amount of implementation and maintenance. So this is more just us saying compliance, in particular along with security, they are much more possible. You can go far further with SharePoint and 365, and it should possibly be something that most of the people in this webinar are considering.
Perfect.
Okay, and I think that might, oh, wrong side. I think that might be us. Question time. Wow, we actually finished 5 minutes early. Brilliant. Does anyone have any questions or anything they would like us to show?
Yes. Tuan is saying, can a member delete a file? If so, will version history help?
Yeah, so by default, when you delete a file in SharePoint, it goes to something called the recycle bin. And I think you've got like 90 days or something like that to be able to restore out of it. The version history goes with the file. So when you restore the file from the recycle bin, you can recover the version history. Now you can go further than that. You can set up retention policies to basically say if the file is in this team or if it's this kind of file, even if someone deletes it, please retain it for 7 years. So by default, you get a few months. Yeah. And there's also a second stage recycle bin, I should say, as well. So if you delete something from the recycle bin, it can still be recovered. But just maybe hedge off another question. SharePoint isn't really a backup solution. So it doesn't have backups. It is still your responsibility to back up the data, but there are third-party services that can back up everything for you. let us know if you want us to talk about that further. It's up to you as an organisation to decide if you need that or not.
Cool, thank you. Is SharePoint compliant to the New Zealand Privacy Act, says Lindsay, asks Lindsay.
Yeah, so it's a very long topic. There is a web page that goes through and says exactly what standards it is compliant with, but that's more to do with what Microsoft is compliant with. And if you're using the tool, it doesn't necessarily make you compliant straight away. So yeah, I think SharePoint, and please, I'm not a lawyer, is compliant with most of the New Zealand standards, if not all. But
yeah,
yeah,
if you're concerned about like, is there a you know, out of the box you in SharePoint you're in breach like some sort of data sovereignty or anything, it's a no. You know, it's going to be straight away. It's going to be as or more compliant than sitting on your file server. So hopefully that does answer your question. But it's more the Privacy Act is we did a presentation on it actually. Last year, and it's not on TechSoup, sorry, I thought it was, but we did one, and we got a lawyer to come along and talk about it, and it's more, you know, obviously what data you have on individuals, you know, consumers, users, personal people rather than businesses. And what happens if you're breached? The good thing is the SharePoint kind of enables you to do more with logging and tracking and potential deletions. It's not as heavy as GDPR, but I'd say that if I understand the direction you're going with the question, I'd say it's a yes. But of course, it doesn't mean that you will always be compliant. If you get breached by a phishing attempt, then you, without notification to the recipient, the people that were breached, then you would be non-compliant.
Yeah, so there's also a link here I've got. I'm not sure if Jane, you can paste it to the entire audience if I flick it through to you. Yeah, and that's got a lot of stuff that should hopefully answer that.
Lovely, thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions actually. Peter is asking what considerations should be taken into account with having files on local drive, and he's also asking what specific enhancements does SharePoint have over files and folder permissions.
So do you mean, sorry, go ahead, Alex, you go.
Well, so first of all, SharePoint files on local drives considerations, if they're saved to the local drive, obviously if that computer gets lost, stolen, those files will be accessible. If they're cloud only, then they won't be. So maybe first consideration would be think about encryption on
protecting the workstation,
protecting the workstations. That would be the first thing you need to worry about. So make sure it's got antivirus, and there is tools that can basically say, don't let people sync files unless the computer is compliant. That's what we're kind of meaning by you can go further with security. And sorry, Jane, what's the second half of that question?
What specific enhancements does SharePoint have over files and folder permissions?
For files and folder permissions? It's basically the same as what you get on a file server, but the whole Teams thing is new, and that's something that isn't on a file server. So giving the ability for a user to quick and easily see who's got access to a team and then have access to the files. There are more file permissions than that, and you can drill down deeper. But when you start doing that, it starts taking it away from what your staff can manage and gets more back towards what the IT can do. So you can set permissions on individual files or individual folders in a particular team. But you need to think carefully if you want to do that, because you're taking it away from the staff and back to the IT.
Yeah, and it's attempting to be simple, but I think just to help answer that one, you know, that the things that you can do are add things like conditional access, which, you know, technically, you know, you could say the user can access the file, but not if they're located outside New Zealand or Australia. And so you can add additional kind of, I guess, permissions that are more related to the identity than the file. But there is, I guess, what I'm trying to say is there's more options, but not necessarily specific to the permissions settings that you would traditionally see in a file server.
Deborah is asking, can I send a document from SharePoint to another organisation via email, and can they open it if they don't have SharePoint?
Yes. Yes and yes. So you can. It depends on the settings of each team. Some teams allow you to share externally by you click on the link and you can share a link and you can send that via email and they'll be able to open it as a guest. Or you can lock it down a little bit further and say only this particular person can open it, and then they'll get the document on the internet and they'll be forced to enter a code that is emailed to them to be able to open it. So that's if they don't have Office 365.
Yeah, so just to help give an example, so we have the IT team have a board, and we have members of the board that don't have IT team addresses, and we put our board papers in a SharePoint folder that's been running for 2 years, and it's got subsequent, January, February, March. Well, we didn't have one in January, but anyway, April, May, etc. And we just say we've dropped it in the folder, and the staff, the people, the board members don't have a SharePoint, they don't have their own SharePoint tenancy, like they haven't subscribed to 365 paying a license. But we did require a sign-in, which means the first time that they were to engage, they had to log in with a Microsoft account. Now, it doesn't mean a Microsoft account. I think they're Gmail accounts or something like that. But they had to authenticate in and set up a password and that kind of thing. But they can do it. They don't need to pay anything. They don't need to register and spend a lot of time. It is something you can do. Now, you can also make it a public file, which generally you do for individual files, which say if you wanted to send an image to a designer or something, you didn't want them to have to go through that palaver, you could just send that and they just get access to it. No, it doesn't require sign in, just in. And that'd be something that, if you're getting smart, you want to put a bit of a timer on, those types of things. And you obviously want to be careful about what you share out publicly because that person can potentially forward that on and on.
Yeah.
Cool.
The most common use case we see for that is contractors and board members. Sorry, Jane.
No worries. Heather is asking, can SharePoint link in any way to an external facing website?
No, not really. Well, you can have links within your SharePoint to external websites, and you can have links to internal stuff from external websites, but it's not public facing, no. So people externally won't be able to see your intranet. Yeah.
I'm sure if you did some research, there's possibly ways you could do it, but you're kind of going against what it's supposed to do and probably leaving yourself a little bit exposed.
Yeah.
And final question from Paul. We're having issues with configuration of documents that are edited in SharePoint with online Word versus edited with Word on the computer, which may change the format when they're uploaded. Do you have any suggestions?
It's a good question. You may. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
It's not something I've really seen recently. I know that a lot of the older versions of Word, so 2003, 2008 maybe, save files as like a doc or a .xl, XLS. And these days there's more modern ones, so you might have seen docx, DOCX. While you can store the older files on SharePoint, a lot of the features are removed, like saving on the fly or like editing online. So yeah, that's mainly for older files, but it's simply a matter of opening up the file in Word and saving it as a modern file. But if you're using a modern Word, you shouldn't have any problem.
Look, I can vouch for him, actually, Alex, sorry to cut you off, but, there can be formatting differences, particularly sort of background images and that kind of thing. I think, I'm particularly lazy, like we have a proposal document, and if I'm opening it in the web-based version, I will, and it's a bit off, I'll jump into the desktop version. I think it's kind of one of those things where, as we're moving from the traditional version of Word to the online, we're kind of going to see, particularly if we've had a template that's been modified and modified and modified over time, it's continued formatting, it's a very good chance it could be a little bit off, look a little bit different. It's still working, you can still access the documents, but it just looks different, it's imperfect. And I think if you were to build that in the online Word, you'd probably find it would translate better the other way. I don't have a perfect answer. I don't think we have a perfect answer for you, but yeah, it's certainly a known thing that I've seen. It hasn't caused us pain, but if it does, then we'll probably try and figure out what we do with it. But yeah, I'd say potentially try sort of start from scratch designing your template, particularly if there's sort of image-based or backgrounds and that kind of thing in the online version, and see how it works when you open it the other way.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you both. That was brilliant. And thank you everybody for joining us today. If anybody has any questions, please do reach out to either Colin or Alex. And as I said at the beginning, you will be receiving a copy of the recording and the slides towards the end of today. Thank you both for joining us, and have a great day, everybody. And please do fill in the survey that will just pop up once this webinar is finishing. We'd really love any feedback.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.